Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for ACC. What is the proposed increase in ACC levy fees for a car, and how much would it have been if the date for full funding of the motor vehicle account is not extended?
Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The ACC board has recommended an increase in the average motor vehicle levy of $130.28 based on the current law and full funding date of 2014. The changes announced yesterday include deferring the full funding date to 2019 and reduces this increase to $30.28. The option remains for this to be funded by an increase in the petrol levy or on the registration fee, and the board is consulting with New Zealanders on those options.
The Honourable David Parker.
Why did the Minister encourage the media to report the prospect of ACC increases for car registration and petrol costs of $130, 4 times the actual $30 increase? And isn't this just another example of his scaremongering to justify cuts to ACC entitlements?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick
Mr
Smith.
Speaker, the board of ACC is actually required to follow the law. And if the law is followed, that is the figure. If the member was at the press conference, he would know that I repeatedly, and the media has rightly reported, that the government's highest figure that we think is realistic is the $30, and that is why we're making legislative and other changes. I would say to the member opposite that it has been necessary for the government to communicate with New Zealanders the true financial position of ACC because the previous government hid it and breached the Public Finance Act.
Sue Bradford.
Supplementary to the Minister. Which parties have guaranteed their support to him for the ACC legislation which will give effect to the announcements on the future of ACC which he has made this week?
Mr Speaker,
Dr Nick Smith.
the Cabinet on Monday approved the bill that has been drafted up by PCO. I'm having discussions with a number of parties to get the necessary support for this legislation to be passed so that we might be able to limit the increase in levies on New Zealanders.
The Honourable David Parker.
Does the Minister stand by his comment, quote, "If my doctor told me I was terminally ill and had 30 days to live, with the ACC rules the way they are, I'd be finding myself a train to throw myself under on the 29th day because my family would be treated so much more generously than under the current law"? And has he any evidence that New Zealanders have been committing suicide to get ACC cover for their surviving children?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, that was... Mr Speaker, that was...
Order.
Mr Speaker, that was never the inference. What I was attempting... Mr Speaker, what I was attempting to do is to point out, and Mr Speaker, I'm actually happy to apologise.
I apologise to the Minister, but the Labor opposition asked a question. They might just like to hear the answer, and I can't hear it.
Mr Speaker, the same question was put to me by the media when I came into the House, and I said that I am happy to apologise. Suicide is an absolute tragedy, and I would not wish it on anyone. Having said that, I do think it's important to point out that if a family suffers the tragedy of a loved one being lost through heart disease, through cancer, through a brain tumour, they are not, in my view, different to those that suffer it from suicide. I do believe it was a mistake and wrong of the previous government to extend the ACC scheme to include suicide, and that was the point I was attempting to make.
Dr Jackie Blue.
To the Minister, what advice has the Minister received in response to the claim that the levy increases would be less if the government had pushed out the full funding date to 2019 earlier?
Mr Speaker,
Dr Nick Smith.
This claim is ridiculous, as it actually makes absolutely no difference to the levies whether the legislation extending the full funding date is passed in 2008, in 2009 or 2010. The key decision is what date it is extended to. This government wanted to get a full grasp of ACC's financial position before making policy decisions, and it has taken the board some time to develop a plan to address this. I find it rich that members opposite criticise the fact that we've not pushed the full funding date out when they had 9 years to do so and did not?
Sue Bradford.
Is the Minister telling the House that he indeed does not have the numbers to get the new ACC legislation through, and that's why the bill isn't coming up in the House under urgency today?
Mr. Speaker, I'm in consultation with parties to try and get support for this ACC reform bill, because I think it is important that we make these changes to the ACC scheme to make it fair, to make it affordable and to make it sustainable, and I'll be having ongoing discussions with other parties to try and get the support in this Parliament for sensible change.
The Honourable David Parker.
Does the Minister accept statements by motorcyclists that they are now paying for accidents caused by cars? And given Mr Judge's comments on the radio today that the setting of levies is a political decision, does he accept his government has got it wrong?
Mr. Speaker,
Dr. Nick Smith.
The interesting thing about the motorcycle accidents is that even if you assume that every single accident between a motorcycle and a car is the car's fault, the levies would still have to be over $750. The actual costs for those large motorcycles is actually $2,700. Now, I think the increase that the board has proposed with respect to motorcycles is a big ask. But I do think this country needs to have an honest discussion about the cost of motorcycle accidents and where they rest. It is a final decision for government to make, and I look forward to the discussion about it. I would make the point that if motorcyclists aren't to pay for the cost of those accidents, then someone else has to.
Dr. Jackie Blue.
Thank you. To the Minister, what reports has the Minister received on the claims that ACC collected more in levies in 2008-09 than the lifetime costs of claims incurred in 2008-09?
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
The reports I've received from ACC is that this claim is absolute nonsense. ACC received levies in 2008-09 of $4.2 billion. The lifetime costs of claims incurred in that year, based on the latest valuation, is $7.1 billion. Mr Parker should apologise to the public of New Zealand for misleading them on this important point.
The Honourable David Parker.
How can it be fair for the government to charge poor people who can only afford older cars higher ACC levies than wealthier people with more expensive, safer new cars?
Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
The government has made no decisions about the way in which we can provide better incentives for safety. The legislation that we are proposing would, for instance, make provision for no-claim bonuses that would reward an old car owner just as much as a new car owner. I think the essential point for this government is that we need to improve the incentives for safety, for employers and for motor vehicle owners, and that's why we are progressing these reforms.
Sandra Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for ACC, does he agree that ACC should tighten procedures to limit access to counselling for those injured through serious crimes?
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just getting the correct answer. Mr. Speaker.
Well, order. I just wonder though whether how well that question relates. The primary question relates to the ACC levies for cars and the motor vehicle account. And point of order, the Honourable Darren Hughes.
Maybe if I can assist the House, I think the member who's asked the question on behalf of the government has actually read out oral question number 4, which is a Labor Party question that she's read out. If maybe she checks through her Patsy files, she'll find the correct question to ask.
Order. I thank the Honourable Darren Hughes for his assistance in this matter. The Honourable David Parker.
My supplementary to the Minister is he aware that falls by the elderly are one of the fastest growing sources of ACC claims and one of the top 10 causes of hospital admissions? And if so, why have ACC today advised that ACC fall prevention programs such as the Otago Exercise and Fall Prevention Program have been cancelled?
Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it is certainly true that falls by older people has been an area of very substantive increase in claims and costs for ACC. The point I'd make to the member is that ACC's board is looking at the cost effectiveness of those programs. I'd put to the member, if those programs that his government had put in place were so successful, why is it that claims are ballooning at the rate that they are? What the board is saying is that we need to invest in cost-effective programs for injury prevention and not just any old program.
Question number 3, Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Energy and Resources and asks, how many houses were insulated in September through the government's Warm Up New Zealand Heat Smart